In 1942, during the darkest days of World War II, when bombs were shaking the skies of London, a young C.S.LEWIS gave a talk on a radio that gripped millions of terrified hearts. He told them that God often allows the comfort of feelings to disappear, not to abandon us, but to make us stronger than fear itself. Think about that. While the world outside was burning, he was reminding people that true strength isn't born in safety, but in the fire of trials. And isn't that the very lesson we keep running from today? The reason your motivation fades after awakening isn't because God has forgotten you. It's because He's preparing you to rise higher than motivation, into wisdom, courage, and unshakable endurance. When people begin their journey of awakening, whether it is spiritual, personal, or even a new dream they are chasing, they often feel a surge of energy that seems unstoppable. It feels like a blazing fire inside the chest. They wake up with excitement, they talk about it with passion, and they walk as if gravity itself has grown weaker. This stage feels like nothing can stand in their way. Yet what most people never expect is that this fire doesn't stay forever. It begins to dim. The same person who once jumped out of bed filled with vision starts waking up heavy, confused, asking themselves where the spark went. And this is the very place where many give up. They think the dream has died, or worse, that God has abandoned them. But that is not the truth. The truth is that God often allows that fire to cool so that a person can discover a strength deeper than feelings. C.S. Lewis once said that God often withdraws the comforts of His presence so that His children can learn to stand on their own faith. If the fire never faded, we would never grow. If feelings always carried us, we would never learn the discipline that transforms us. Think of it like a child learning to walk. At first, the parent holds both hands tightly, guiding every step. The child feels safe, motivated, and full of confidence. But the day comes when the parent lets go, not because they are cruel, not because they stop caring, but because letting go is the only way the child will learn balance. If the parent never lets go, the child never learns to stand. The fading of motivation works the same way. God is not punishing you by letting the fire go dim. He is giving you a chance to develop balance, endurance, and roots that cannot be shaken. There's also a scientific dimension to this truth. Neuroscience shows us that motivation is often tied to dopamine, the chemical in the brain that gives a sense of pleasure, drive, and anticipation. When you start something new, dopamine spikes. It's the reason a new relationship feels like a rush, or why the first days at the gym feel filled with determination. But the brain cannot keep that level of dopamine flooding forever. If it did, you would burn out or become addicted. So the brain stabilizes, and what once felt thrilling now feels ordinary. People panic at this stage, thinking something went wrong. In reality, nothing went wrong at all. The brain is simply giving you the chance to switch from external thrill to internal consistency. This is why God often removes the fireworks after awakening. If you only lived by constant highs, you would be addicted to the feeling, not committed to the path. God is interested not in shallow followers who depend on emotional sugar, but in mature souls who can keep walking even in silence. A relationship built only on adrenaline is fragile. A relationship that survives silence and struggle becomes unbreakable. Take a moment to look at your own life. Think of the first time you started a diet, or the first week you tried waking up early to change your routine. At the beginning, the excitement was enough to push you. But after a few days, the body wanted to give up. The spark disappeared, and all you were left with was choice. This is where most people fall. They mistake the disappearance of excitement as a sign they are not capable. But the truth is that this is the test of authenticity. The disappearance of excitement is not the end of the path. It is the beginning of maturity. C.S. Lewis explained it in another way. He said God is like a teacher who sometimes leaves the room to see how the students behave when no one is watching. At first, the students may rely on the teacher's presence, but the real growth comes when the teacher steps out. That is when integrity is born. That is when discipline begins. So when your fire disappears, you are not abandoned. You are being watched to see what you do with freedom. Will you quit, or will you rise into maturity? Psychologically, people often confuse motivation with purpose. Motivation is a feeling, but purpose is an anchor. Feelings rise and fall like waves, but an anchor holds you steady even when the storm is raging. When God removes your fire, He is guiding you to plant your anchor deeper. If your whole life is built on emotions, you will collapse the moment emotions betray you. But if your life is built on conviction, no wave can destroy you. Let's bring this closer to home. In the United States, countless people start the year with resolutions. They buy gym memberships, journals, courses, and equipment. The first 2 weeks feel electric, but statistics show that by February, almost 80% have quit. The fire is gone. Was their dream fake? No. What was missing was the understanding that the fire is only meant to start you, not sustain you. The starter flame ignites the journey, but the steady burn of discipline keeps it alive. God allows this shift so you can graduate from excitement into endurance. Think of pioneers, soldiers, leaders, and innovators in American history. None of them lived on constant highs. The founding fathers, pioneers crossing the plains, civil rights leaders marching in fear, all of them faced long stretches with no fireworks, no applause, and no visible motivation. But they walked forward anyway. Why? Because they had learned the illusion of constant fire. They understood that the path of growth is not carried by feelings, but by choices. God withdraws the fire because He is building that same steel inside you. It is important to acknowledge the emotional pain of this stage. When you first feel the fire go out, it hurts. You feel abandoned, confused, and sometimes even betrayed. People cry out asking why God would allow this silence. But this silence is not rejection, it is invitation. Invitation into a deeper level of trust. Invitation into a maturity that cannot be broken by circumstances. If God always gave you the sugar rush of motivation, your soul would remain like a child, clinging to candy. But by removing it, He is feeding you real food, wisdom, courage, and resilience. There is a beautiful truth here. The dimming of the fire is not the death of the journey, it is the birth of character. Just as fire burns brightest when the logs are pressed together, your soul burns strongest when you press into discipline during silence. Think about a marriage again. The first months are filled with sparks, butterflies, and excitement. But if that was the only fuel, the relationship would not last. True love shows itself in the ordinary, in the small choices, in the days that feel dull. And yet those dull days are where love becomes unshakable. In the same way, your purpose becomes unshakable when you learn to walk without fireworks. This shift is not just spiritual, but deeply psychological. People who rely only on motivation rarely succeed. Motivation can get you started, but habits carry you through. Science proves that the brain wires itself through repetition, not through excitement. A student may be motivated to study one night before an exam, but the student who studies daily through discipline will always win. God removes the fire so that you can develop this kind of consistency. There is also an element of fear in this process. When the fire fades, fear tries to whisper in your ear, "See, you don't have what it takes. You were just kidding yourself." But this fear is a liar. The disappearance of fire is not evidence of weakness, but of training. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is walking forward when you feel nothing. This is what God wants to build in you. C.S.LEWIS often spoke of God as a parent who wants children that will freely choose Him, not robots who obey only when they feel joy. In the same way, God wants you to choose your purpose, your discipline, and your growth, even when the emotions vanish. That is where true freedom lies. If you can only move when you feel motivated, you are not free. You are slave to feelings. But if you can move without motivation, you are free. This is the illusion of constant fire, the belief that you will always feel motivated if you are truly on the right path. The truth is the exact opposite. If you are truly on the right path, there will be seasons when you feel nothing, and yet you must keep walking. This is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of maturity. God removes the fire so that you can learn to build your own inner flame, one that cannot be extinguished by circumstances. So the next time you feel the fire fading, do not panic. Do not assume you are lost. Instead, recognize it as a divine signal that you are entering the stage of growth. Your feelings carried you this far, but now faith, discipline, and conviction will carry you further. This is where you move from a beginner to a master. This is where you graduate from a seeker to a leader. This is where you stop depending on fireworks and start burning with an inner light that no darkness can put out. And if you listen closely, you will find that the fire never truly disappears. It only changes form. It shifts from being a loud blaze outside you to a steady glow inside you. That steady glow is more powerful than any temporary spark, because sparks burn fast and fade, but steady flames can light a whole house. That steady flame is what God is building in you. When people look at their lives and wonder why their motivation fades after awakening, they often miss one of the deepest truths about growth. Growth never happens in comfort. Growth never happens when everything feels easy. Growth is born in resistance, in the weight you are asked to carry, in the moments when the spark is gone, and you still choose to push forward. God allows your motivation to fade because He is training you the same way a coach trains an athlete. Without resistance, there is no strength. Without struggle, there is no maturity. Without silence, there is no depth. Think about how muscles are built. If you go to the gym and lift weights that are too light, your muscles will never change. You could spend hours every day doing the same comfortable movements, and years later you would look the same. Growth requires resistance. It requires strain. It requires pushing against something that does not want to move. Only then do fibers tear. Only then does healing begin. Only then do you come back stronger. God knows this principle, and because He loves you, He applies it to your soul. He pulls back the easy motivation so you will learn to exercise your will, your faith, your endurance. He is not punishing you, He is training you. Science confirms this process. Neuroscientists have studied what happens to the brain during learning and adaptation. They discovered something powerful. Stress, challenge, and effort are not enemies of growth. They are the birthplace of it. When you struggle to master something new, neurons fire and connections strengthen. If everything felt effortless, your brain would stagnate. That's why people who never push themselves often feel stuck, bored, or lost. They are not exercising their mental or spiritual muscles. By contrast, people who keep stretching, who keep challenging themselves, are alive with new energy. When God removes the high of motivation, He is giving you the chance to engage your deeper faculties. Think of an eagle teaching its young to fly. At first, the eaglets sit in the nest, warm, comfortable, and fed. But a day comes when the mother eagle stirs the nest, even pushes her young out. It looks cruel from the outside. Why would she do this? But the push is the greatest gift. As the eaglet falls, its wings stretch, and what looked like danger becomes destiny. The struggle is the training ground. Without the fall, the wings never learn their purpose. In the same way, when your motivation vanishes, you feel as if you are falling. But what is really happening is that God is teaching you to stretch your wings. Psychologists speak of intrinsic motivation, the kind that comes from within, compared to extrinsic motivation, the kind that comes from outside rewards. When you are first awakened, it feels like extrinsic motivation is everywhere. New insights, emotional highs, encouragement, energy. But if God left you there, you would remain dependent. By withdrawing the rush, He teaches you to cultivate intrinsic motivation. That is the kind of motivation that doesn't depend on applause, on novelty, or on fireworks. It comes from values, purpose, and conviction. It is the difference between a sprinter who only runs when the crowd is cheering and a marathon runner who keeps moving even when the road is empty. This training of spiritual muscles happens in daily life more than in dramatic moments. A person decides to pray even when they don't feel goosebumps. A student chooses to study even when the thrill of a new semester is gone. A parent keeps loving and sacrificing for their children even when exhaustion screams at them. These small decisions are like lifting invisible weights. Every time you choose discipline over comfort, your soul grows stronger. Every time you walk in faith when your feelings are absent, your spirit learns endurance. These muscles are invisible, but they shape who you are more than any outward success. Think of the greatest leaders the world has known. None of them reached greatness through constant motivation. They were shaped by seasons of silence, doubt, and inner struggle. Nelson Mandela spent years in prison with no applause, no encouragement, and no certainty that he would ever see freedom. Yet in that darkness, his inner strength was forged. Martin Luther King Jr. faced constant threats, fatigue, and despair, but he kept moving because his purpose was greater than his feelings. C.S.LEWIS himself endured personal loss, grief, and long seasons where faith fell dry. Yet his writings continue to inspire millions because he learned to walk with God even when feelings were absent. The pattern repeats throughout history and in our own lives. The removal of motivation is not abandonment, but refinement. If you always felt motivated, you would never discover what kind of person you really are. True character is revealed when the fire dies down and you still choose to walk. When the applause is gone and you still speak. When the excitement is gone and you still show up. That is when you discover that strength is not in the rush, but in the roots. From a psychological angle, this training builds resilience. Resilience is the ability to recover quickly from difficulties. It is not something you are born with, it is something you develop. Every time life pushes you down and you rise again, your resilience grows. Every time you walk without motivation, your resilience grows. Scientists have even found that small doses of stress, like lifting weights or solving tough problems, actually improve the brain's ability to adapt and strengthen. Too much stress breaks a person, but the right amount of struggle makes them unshakable. This is the same way God designs spiritual training. He allows just enough silence, just enough resistance to shape your soul without destroying it. There is also something deeply spiritual happening here. When God removes your motivation, He is inviting you into a deeper relationship with Him. At first, many people love God because of how He makes them feel. The warmth, the joy, the fire. But God desires a love that goes beyond feelings, a love that chooses Him even in silence. Just as a marriage is proven not on honeymoon days, but on ordinary days of sacrifice, faith is proven in the ordinary days of discipline. God wants children who can say, "Even if I feel nothing, I will still walk with you. Even if the fire fades, I will still trust you." This is the love that transforms a soul into a fortress. When we talk about the training of spiritual muscles, we must also acknowledge the fear that comes with it. Fear often shouts when motivation disappears. It says, "You will fail. You are not strong enough. You were never meant for this." These voices are loud, and many surrender to them. But here lies the opportunity. When fear shouts, and you choose to act anyway, that is courage. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is obedience in the presence of fear. Each time you practice this, your courage grows. And just like a muscle, it becomes stronger with repetition. Think of a young athlete stepping onto the field for the first time. At first, adrenaline and excitement carry them. But eventually, exhaustion sets in. The body aches. The lungs burn. This is where many stop. But the ones who push through the pain discover a new level of endurance. What once felt impossible becomes natural. The same thing happens spiritually. At first, excitement carries you. Then the fire fades and your soul aches. If you quit here, you remain the same. But if you keep walking, you discover strength you didn't know you had. God allows this so you can learn that you are stronger than your feelings. There's also a profound sense of dignity in this process. When you rely only on emotional highs, you are not in control. You are being carried. But when you walk without them, you are participating in your own growth. You are no longer just a passenger. You are a co-creator with God in the shaping of your destiny. That is why the saints, philosophers, and wise thinkers of every age speak about discipline, endurance, and resilience as treasures. They know that this training produces not just strength, but dignity. We live in a culture that worships quick results and easy comfort. People want success without struggle, transformation without tears, reward without sacrifice. But life doesn't work that way, and God doesn't work that way. He loves you too much to leave you weak. He loves you too much to let you remain shallow. So He removes the easy motivation to call forth your hidden strength. He knows that without resistance you will never see what you are capable of. Just as gold must go through fire to be purified, your soul must go through silence and struggle to shine. There is also a scientific beauty to this design. When you practice discipline without motivation, your brain literally rewires itself. Habits are formed. Pathways are strengthened. Over time, what once felt impossible becomes natural. At first, praying daily may feel hard. Reading, exercising, or practicing gratitude may feel forced. But the more you repeat it, the more natural it becomes. This is the gift hidden in the training. The fire that once carried you from the outside begins to burn inside you, steady and unshakable. C.S.LEWIS once described how God desires sons and daughters who can grow into maturity, not infants who stay in the nursery. Maturity requires responsibility. Responsibility requires discipline. Discipline requires training. And training always involves struggle. That is why motivation disappears after awakening. It is the beginning of your training season. It is not meant to destroy you, but to reveal you. So when you feel that the fire is gone, remember the gym. Remember the eagle. Remember the pioneers of history. Remember the saints and the leaders who walked through silence and yet became unshakable. Remember that muscles only grow when they are pushed, and souls only grow when they are tested. Remember that God has not abandoned you. He is standing as the loving coach, the wise parent, the refining fire, watching as you discover strength you never knew existed. And when you rise, when you walk even without the fire, you will realize something life-changing. You are no longer the same person. You are stronger, wiser, braver, and more resilient. You no longer depend on shallow highs to carry you. You carry yourself. And in that moment, you will see the truth. The training of spiritual muscles was never meant to hurt you. It was always meant to set you free. There comes a stage in every person's journey where the external sparks that once pushed them forward are taken away. At first, you might be filled with energy because of a new book you read, a sermon you heard, or a powerful experience that made you feel like life had finally changed forever. You told yourself that you would never go back, that from this day forward you would live at a higher level. The excitement was real. The fire was real. But as days passed, the outside inspiration began to fade. The words that once gave you chills now feel distant. The songs that once brought tears no longer move you. The people who once cheered you seem quiet. And you find yourself asking, why don't I feel what I used to feel? This is the place where many begin to think that something is wrong. But what is happening is not a failure. What is happening is a transition. God is moving you from external inspiration to internal discipline. This transition is one of the most difficult, yet one of the most powerful shifts a human being can make. When everything inside you has to shift from being pushed by the outside to being pulled by something within, you discover what your soul is truly made of. External inspiration is a gift, but it is never meant to be your permanent fuel. It is like the starter flame that lights a fire, but it cannot sustain the wood for long. Once the spark is given, you have to tend the flame yourself. That tending is called discipline. Psychology has a term for this: intrinsic motivation. It is the kind of motivation that comes not from applause, not from reward, not from pressure, but from deeply held values. When you act from this place, your actions flow from who you are, not from what others give you. God allows the fading of external inspiration because He wants you to discover the deeper strength of intrinsic motivation. He wants you to build habits, routines, and values that remain unshakable regardless of feelings. Think about a student preparing for exams. In the beginning, the excitement of starting a new semester can drive them. Teachers encourage, parents cheer, friends talk about the future. The atmosphere itself feels inspiring. But months later, when the nights are long and the books feel heavy, those outside voices are no longer enough. The only thing that keeps the student going is their own commitment to the vision of what they want to become. That is when grades improve, not because of outside energy, but because of inner resolve. The same principle applies to spiritual awakening. God removes the easy fuel, so you will learn to rely on something deeper than excitement. This shift is necessary because external inspiration is fragile. It can vanish in a moment if circumstances change. If your whole strength depends on the right words from others, what happens when those words stop coming? If your whole drive depends on a good atmosphere, what happens when the atmosphere becomes dry? People who only live on external sparks never last. They rise fast but collapse just as quickly. But those who have learned internal discipline can keep walking even when the road feels endless. They keep showing up, not because the outside world is clapping, but because their soul has made a decision. C.S.LEWIS wrote about this idea when he explained that God desires children who will choose Him freely, not because they are swept by emotions, but because they have developed the will to love. He compared it to a teacher who sometimes leaves the room, not to abandon the students, but to give them the chance to show whether they will live with integrity. External inspiration is like the teacher in the room, guiding every move. Internal discipline is what happens when the teacher steps out and you still do what is right. This is what God is training in you. Look at the way athletes train. At first, the coach's encouragement and the excitement of the crowd push them. But the real transformation happens in the lonely hours when no one is watching, when it is just the athlete and the practice. Day after day, repetition after repetition, discipline is carved into the body and mind. That discipline becomes muscle memory. When the day of competition arrives, they no longer depend on the crowd's applause to act. Their discipline carries them. The same is true for you. When the fire of awakening dims, you are not losing your path. You are being invited into the same kind of discipline that separates the great from the ordinary. There is a deep spiritual wisdom in this process. When God first awakens you, He often gives you many confirmations, many feelings, many signs. But then He becomes silent. Silence is not absence. Silence is training. Silence is the space where you learn to walk by faith, not by sight. If your love for God, your love for your purpose, and your love for your vision can survive silence, then it is real. Emotions can lie, but discipline reveals truth. This shift also transforms relationships. Many people begin relationships because of excitement, attraction, and outside sparks. But what makes marriages last is not constant fireworks. It is the daily choice of discipline. It is waking up and choosing to love when it feels easy and when it feels hard. That is what makes love durable. That is what makes it beautiful. The same applies to your relationship with your purpose. God is teaching you to love your purpose, not just when it feels thrilling, but also when it feels heavy. When people lose external inspiration, they often fall into despair. They think, if I don't feel it, it must not be real. But the truth is that the lack of feelings is where reality begins. Feelings are temporary. Discipline is eternal. Feelings are like the weather, they change every day. Discipline is like the mountain, it stands through seasons. God is not interested in raising weather-driven lives. He is interested in raising mountain-like souls who can stand through storms. That is why He takes away the constant inspiration. There is also a neurological truth hidden here. Dopamine, the brain's reward chemical, spikes when you experience novelty. That is why new beginnings feel so exciting. But over time, the novelty fades and the brain returns to balance. If you chase only novelty, you will always need something new to stay motivated. That leads to addiction, distraction, and instability. God interrupts this cycle by letting the novelty fade, forcing you to build discipline. Discipline rewires the brain in a different way. It creates long-term stability, habits, and inner strength. The rush of excitement cannot do this. Only repetition can. Think of the pioneers of faith and history. Moses did not walk through the wilderness for 40 years on constant feelings of inspiration. He walked because of a conviction. Rosa Parks did not stay in her seat because she felt an emotional high. She stayed because of discipline rooted in values. Soldiers, parents, and leaders throughout history were not carried by constant sparks. They were carried by choices, by steady discipline. That is why their lives became examples of strength. This shift is also deeply personal. Every person has to come to the moment where they stop asking for someone else to carry them and start choosing to carry themselves. Children rely on parents for energy, but adulthood begins when you take responsibility for your own direction. The same happens spiritually and emotionally. God knows you cannot stay a child forever. He removes the constant hand-holding so you will learn to walk on your own. At first it feels cruel, but when you look back, you will see it was love. Discipline is not glamorous. It does not always feel exciting. It does not always give goosebumps, but it shapes you into a person who can be trusted with greater things. If you cannot be faithful in silence, you cannot be trusted with influence. If you cannot walk without applause, you cannot be trusted with leadership. God removes external inspiration to prepare you for the weight of your calling. The quiet repetition of daily discipline is what builds the strength to carry that weight. There's also freedom in this process. If you always depend on others to inspire you, you will never be free. You will always be waiting for someone else to wake you up, to remind you, to encourage you. But when you build internal discipline, you carry your own light. You become free from the chains of external circumstances. Your joy, your consistency, your purpose no longer depend on whether others approve or whether you feel a rush. It depends on your decision. That freedom is priceless. The journey from external inspiration to internal discipline is not easy. It demands tears, sweat, and patience, but it is the path to maturity. Every seed must leave the comfort of soil and break through the dirt to see the sun. Every bird must leave the comfort of the nest and stretch its wings. Every soul must leave the comfort of outside sparks and build an inner flame. This is how greatness is born. When you find yourself in that season where the fire is gone, remember this truth. You are not broken. You are not abandoned. You are being trained. You are being invited into the deeper stage of growth where discipline, resilience, and faith take root. This is the place where you move from being carried by others to carrying yourself. This is the place where you move from feeling to choosing. This is the place where you become unshakable. There comes a moment when what you carry inside begins to outgrow what you used to depend on outside. At first, everything feels like a constant stream of signals guiding you. People confirm your steps, circumstances seem to align, and signs appear to reassure you. You begin to think that this is how life will always be, that the clarity you feel now will never fade. Yet time proves something different. The signs that once spoke loudly start to go quiet. The coincidences that used to confirm your choices no longer show up in the same way. The voices that once echoed back the path you were on begin to fall silent. and you are left in the middle of a road wondering if you lost your way or if you were abandoned. That season shakes people to the core because silence can feel like rejection. But what is happening in that silence is not rejection at all. It is graduation. It is the point where you are no longer being carried by constant external confirmations, but being drawn to walk by conviction alone. When a child is learning to walk, a parent claps, encourages, and celebrates every tiny step. But after a while, the parent no longer claps at every single step the child takes. Not because they love the child less, but because they trust the child more. Growth is proven not by how often you are cheered on, but by how far you can go without the cheering. That is the stage where you find yourself when the outer signals grow quiet. It is God's way of showing that He now trusts you with a deeper level of maturity. It is natural to long for the constant affirmations of the beginning because they felt safe. They gave you confidence. They helped you believe in yourself. But staying in that place forever would keep you dependent, like a child who never learns to walk without holding a hand. At some point, your soul has to be weaned off constant affirmation so that it can discover strength that does not collapse when the applause stops. That is the shift that feels painful but necessary. People often misinterpret this stage. They think silence means they are no longer guided, when in truth silence means they are trusted. They think the absence of confirmation means abandonment, when in truth it means elevation. You are not being left behind, you are being invited to walk at a higher level where you no longer need the same level of reassurance you once did. If you think about your own life, the areas where you have grown the most were not the areas where everything came easy and every answer was immediate. The places where you grew the most were the places where you had to wrestle with uncertainty, where you had to decide without guarantees, where you had to move forward not because the way was lit, but because you chose to carry your own light. Psychologists call this internal locus of control. It means you stop waiting for the outside world to tell you what is real, and you begin to anchor reality in your own decision-making. Instead of being tossed around by every signal and every circumstance, you begin to act from within. It is one of the hardest transitions a person can make because it feels like stepping out of the shallow water into the deep, but it is also the place where you truly discover your ability to swim. If you think about history, every great leader came to this stage. Martin Luther King Jr. did not have constant applause as he walked toward the dream he carried. There were voices that opposed him, threats that surrounded him, days of silence when he must have questioned whether his vision would ever take root. What carried him was not the consistency of outward signals, but the fire of inward conviction. The same is true of Gandhi, of prophets, of reformers, of inventors. They all reached the point where outward encouragement faded, but the inner flame refused to die. That is what kept them standing when everything around them tried to make them sit down. Faith itself is born here. If life were nothing but confirmations, signs, and constant visible guidance, then there would be no need for faith. Faith is not proven when the way is easy. Faith is proven when the way is silent. When Abraham left his homeland, he did not walk every step with constant signals lighting up the path. Much of his journey was made in silence. Yet he kept moving. That is what made him the father of faith. Faith is not about living with constant clarity. It is about moving even when clarity disappears. That is where trust grows deeper than logic, where obedience stretches beyond understanding, where love becomes more than feeling. This stage tests the human heart. It asks whether you are doing what you are doing because of the signs or because of the truth inside you. If your commitment was only tied to outward confirmations, the silence will break you. But if your commitment is tied to conviction, the silence will only sharpen you. Silence is like the forge of a blacksmith. It feels like fire and pressure, but what is being shaped is steel that will not bend. There is also a beauty in silence that you cannot see at first. When the outer signals stop, you're forced to listen inwardly in a way you never have before. You begin to hear your own thoughts more clearly. You begin to sense your own values with greater weight. You begin to feel God's whispers not through dramatic signs, but through subtle nudges. The silence pushes you to discover a level of sensitivity that constant noise could never allow. It is in that stillness that many discover the voice of their own soul for the first time. Think of an artist. In the early days, the artist may be driven by the applause of others, the encouragement of friends, or the novelty of creating. But as they mature, the real art emerges not when people are watching, but when no one is. In the quiet, the artist begins to create not for validation, but for truth. The silence shapes them into a vessel for something greater. The same happens to anyone who embraces this stage of life. There is also a parallel in nature. When a tree is young, gardeners often place sticks or supports around it to keep it upright. But if those supports remain forever, the tree will never grow strong roots. At some point, the supports must be removed so the tree can learn to stand on its own. That season is risky because storms might come, winds might shake it, but those very pressures push the roots deeper. Without that stage, the tree would never grow strong enough to last for decades. That is exactly why the supports of external confirmation are removed in your life. It is not cruelty, it is growth. The silence also protects you. If you were constantly guided by visible signs, you would become dependent on them to the point where you could be manipulated. You would need confirmation for every step, and anyone who learned to mimic those confirmations could control you. God protects you from that dependency by teaching you to walk in silence. That way, your anchor is not in signs, but in truth. Your strength is not in circumstances, but in conviction. This stage also creates clarity about who you are. When the applause is gone, when the signs are gone, when the noise is gone, what is left is the real you. That is when you discover whether your vision is truly yours or borrowed from others. That is when you realize whether your faith is truly personal or just a reflection of your surroundings. Silence is a mirror, and in that mirror, you see yourself clearly. It may be uncomfortable, but it is liberating because it allows you to live authentically. Some people run from this silence. They go searching for constant confirmations again. They chase new signs, new voices, new excitement. But in doing so, they remain children in their faith and purpose. They never learn the strength of conviction. They become addicted to signals the way some people become addicted to sugar, always needing the next dose to feel alive. Yet those who embrace the silence and walk through it come out with a weight, a depth, and a wisdom that no constant confirmation could have given. It is also in this silence that resilience is built. When you learn to act without needing reassurance at every step, you become unshakable. People may doubt you, circumstances may oppose you, but you have learned to walk without constant agreement. That kind of resilience is what allows you to endure storms others cannot. It allows you to stand when others fall. It allows you to keep moving even when the world grows dark. There is a kind of fear that rises in this stage. Fear of being wrong, fear of being alone, fear of missing the way. That fear is natural, but is also the very pressure that builds courage. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is walking despite fear. Silence gives you the chance to practice courage daily, to prove to yourself that you can move forward even when the path is not lit. That practice shapes you into a person others will one day look to for guidance. Think about your own future for a moment. If you are called to lead, if you are called to carry responsibility, if you're called to influence others, you cannot live on constant signs. You must be able to walk through silence so that when others panic, you can stand firm. You must be able to hold conviction so that when others doubt, you remain steady. This stage is preparing you for that weight. The silence you feel now is the training ground for the voice of strength you will carry tomorrow. So when you feel the outer confirmations slipping away, do not despair. Do not assume you are abandoned. You are being trusted. You are being called to a higher ground where faith, conviction, and resilience are born. The silence is not a punishment, but a promotion. It is not a loss, but a test of strength. It is not an absence, but an invitation to discover what has always been inside you waiting to rise. Fear is one of the oldest companions of the human race. It has been with us since the first man stood under a night sky and heard the sound of something moving in the dark. It is both a warning system and a shadow, both a protector and a prison. When motivation fades after awakening, fear tends to step in, whispering that you cannot move forward, that without the constant fire you once felt, you will collapse. That is where the real lesson begins. Because if you can only move when you feel safe, you are not free. Freedom is when you can still move, still decide, still stand tall even when fear is pressing against your chest like a storm. That is where courage is born. Think of the way the human body responds to fear. Your heart races, your palms sweat, your breathing quickens. It feels like danger is near, yet often there is no actual threat, only the possibility of one. The brain reacts because it is wired to protect you. That wiring saved our ancestors from wild animals and natural disasters. But in modern life, fear often shows up not because of lions or snakes, but because of uncertainty, rejection, and the unknown. You fear being alone. You fear making the wrong choice. You fear failing in front of others. These fears don't bite your skin, but they bite your soul. And that is why courage is not something that comes naturally. Courage has to be chosen, built, and practiced. When C.S. Lewis wrote about faith, he said it is not about emotions that come and go, but about clinging to what you once believed even when your mood has changed. That is another way of saying courage is what holds you steady when feelings fail. The great test of life is not when you are flooded with passion, but when you are standing in silence and fear is trying to convince you to quit. If you can pass that test, you begin to live from a place of strength instead of reaction. Fear often disguises itself as wisdom. It tells you to wait for a better time. It tells you that maybe this isn't the right path. It tells you that one more sign will make things clear. But those are just softer ways of saying don't move. If you look back, some of the best decisions you ever made came with fear attached. The moment before you confessed love, the moment before you started a new career, the moment before you stepped into unknown territory, fear was loud, but courage carried you through. Courage doesn't erase fear, it simply refuses to bow to it. The pioneers who built new lands knew this well. They did not set out on their journeys because they felt fearless. They set out because they decided something mattered more than fear. Imagine the families loading wagons, leaving familiar places, not knowing if they would find food, shelter, or safety. Every step into the wilderness was a gamble, yet they walked because the possibility of freedom was greater than the comfort of staying behind. That same spirit lives in you, waiting to be awakened. Science shows that when you face fear repeatedly, the brain rewires itself. Neural pathways strengthen, the amygdala becomes less reactive, and your ability to act in the presence of fear grows. This is why exposure therapy works for phobias. The very act of leaning into fear reduces its grip. Spiritually, the same truth applies. The more you choose faith over fear, the stronger your spirit grows. Fear does not vanish, but its power over you shrinks. Courage becomes a habit, not a rare burst of bravery. Think about a soldier in training. At first, every loud noise may jolt him, every drill may shake him, but repetition builds strength. Eventually, he can stand steady in situations that once would have broken him. Your own life works the same way. Every time you act in spite of fear, you carve new strength into your soul. Each decision becomes another brick in the foundation of resilience. When God allows fear to confront you after awakening, it is not cruelty, it is construction. He is building in you a structure strong enough to carry the weight of your calling. If all you had was endless motivation, you would never learn to stand when the fire goes out. Motivation is a spark, but courage is the wood that keeps the flame alive. Without courage, sparks die. With courage, sparks turn into bonfires that cannot be extinguished. The enemy of your soul loves fear because it paralyzes. It whispers that you are not enough, that your past disqualifies you, that your weakness will swallow you. Yet every story of redemption begins with someone who faced those whispers and kept going anyway. David stood before Goliath not because he felt no fear, but because he believed God's strength was greater than his fear. Esther walked into the king's court trembling, but her courage saved her people. Even Jesus, in the garden, sweat drops of blood under the weight of what he was about to face, yet he said, "Not my will, but yours." That is courage, not the absence of trembling, but the choice to move through it. Psychology explains that fear and excitement are almost identical in the body. The same adrenaline flows, the same racing heart, the same quickened breath. The difference is the story you attach to it. When you call it fear, you freeze. When you call it excitement, you move. This is why athletes before a big game reframe their nerves as readiness. What if you did the same in your life? What if the moment you feel fear, you saw it as proof you are stepping into something that matters? That reframe can turn fear from a prison into a signal that you are on the edge of growth. Look at your own journey. The times you felt most alive were not when everything was safe, but when you crossed into the unknown. The day you moved to a new city. The time you started a project with no guarantee of success. The moment you opened your heart to someone. Each of those moments carried fear, but each of them also carried life. Fear and life walk hand in hand. To chase one without the other is impossible. That is why courage is essential. It is the bridge that lets you walk across fear into the fullness of life. When motivation fades, fear speaks louder. That is why God allows it. Because until you face fear without the crutch of constant fire, you will never know the depth of courage that sleeps inside you. You cannot discover that you can swim until the water rises. You cannot discover that you can stand until the ground shakes. You cannot discover that you can endure until fear screams that you cannot. Every great soul has walked through this. You are no different. The lesson of courage is not learned in a single moment, is carved over years. Each time you face a fear and act, a piece of your soul changes. Each time you rise when you want to hide, you become stronger. Each time you say yes in the face of trembling, you expand your capacity for life. Courage compounds. What once terrified you becomes normal, and what once seemed impossible becomes possible. That is the gift God gives when He removes motivation and lets fear test you. There is a saying among climbers, the mountain never gets smaller, but you get stronger. Fear does not shrink with time, but your courage grows until fear is no longer a wall, but a shadow. It will always walk beside you, but it will not own you. And that is the freedom that makes life worth living. So when fear rises after your motivation fades, do not see it as punishment. See it as your training ground. See it as the place where God is shaping your courage. See it as the invitation to step into a larger version of yourself. You are not meant to be fearless. You are meant to be courageous. And courage only exists in the presence of fear. When you reach a place where motivation has been stripped away, what remains is often confused for emptiness. You look inside and feel the absence of a fire that once carried you, and you wonder if you are broken. You wonder if something has gone wrong in the soul. Yet what feels like emptiness is not the collapse of your life, it is the classroom of wisdom. That stage where excitement fades, where emotions stop carrying you, is the moment when God places the pen in your hand and waits to see if you can write your own story with steadiness. This is where the difference between inspiration and transformation becomes real. At the beginning of a journey, energy comes easy. You can be driven by novelty, by passion, by the intoxicating feeling of being awakened to something greater. It is like the first days of spring, when flowers bloom wildly and everything feels alive. But no season lasts forever. Summer heat arrives, storms come, and winter settles. If you only know how to live in the spring, you will never survive the year. Wisdom is what teaches you to live through all the seasons without losing yourself. It is the ability to move forward when emotions are not feeding you, to endure when applause is gone, to walk even when no one is clapping. The reason God removes the fire after awakening is not to punish you, but to graduate you. Just like a teacher removes the training wheels when a child learns to ride, life removes the external scaffolding so you can discover balance on your own. It feels scary, it feels unstable, but this is the only way you learn to master the ride. Wisdom is born in those unsteady pedals, not when everything is held up for you. There is a deep beauty in this stage because wisdom has weight that passion never carries. Passion excites, but wisdom anchors. Passion gives you sparks, but wisdom gives you roots. Passion burns bright and fast, but wisdom keeps the flame steady through the long night. That is why you are invited into this stage. Because a life built only on passion will collapse at the first sign of resistance, but a life built on wisdom will endure storms. Science itself confirms this rhythm. Neuroscience shows that novelty releases dopamine, which fuels the rush of motivation. But the brain adapts and the rush fades. If a person chases only dopamine, they burn out or become addicted to constant stimulation. Yet when people shift from dopamine-driven novelty to meaning-driven purpose, they experience longer satisfaction, deeper fulfillment, and mental resilience. That is wisdom in action. It is not about chasing highs, but about living from depth. Think of how the great figures of history carried themselves. They were not fueled by daily bursts of enthusiasm. They were not waiting for emotional highs. They carried vision across decades, across pain, across silence. Nelson Mandela sat in a prison cell for 27 years. No one clapped for him there. No crowds shouted his name in that silence. What kept him alive was not motivation but wisdom, the inner knowing that his suffering could become the soil of freedom. That is the kind of graduation God calls you into. Wisdom also changes the way you see pain. When you are young in spirit, pain feels like an interruption, something unfair, something you must escape. But when you graduate into wisdom, pain becomes a teacher. You begin to see that every scar carries a story, every heartbreak carries a lesson, every delay carries a redirection. Instead of asking, why me, you begin to ask, what can I learn? That shift turns suffering into growth, loss into refinement, silence into guidance. Without wisdom, pain breaks you. With wisdom, pain builds you. There is something unshakable about a person who has walked through this stage. Their voice carries a weight that others feel, not because they shout louder, but because their words are rooted deeper. They don't speak from theory, but from survival. They don't carry excitement that fades, but presence that endures. When you listen to such people, you feel as if you are drinking water from a deep well. That is what graduation into wisdom feels like. In your own life, think of the times you were carried by excitement. Maybe you started a new job, launched a project, or entered a relationship. At first it felt unstoppable, but over time the rush faded and you were left with routine, with responsibility, with ordinary days. Many people give up at this stage. They chase the next rush, start something new again, and repeat the cycle endlessly. But the ones who stay, the ones who build, are the ones who discover wisdom. They stop chasing the rush and begin shaping their life with discipline, love, and endurance. That is how great marriages are built, how legacies are created, how destinies are fulfilled. This stage also reveals who you truly are when no one is watching. Excitement can make anyone look strong. Applause can make anyone feel valuable. But wisdom teaches you to live from an inner compass, not outer noise. When the world goes quiet, and you still rise in morning, still pursue what is right, still love people deeply, still choose integrity over shortcuts, that is wisdom in motion. It is quiet, it is steady, and it is powerful. There is a reason Scripture often ties wisdom to age, but it is not just about years. Age alone does not guarantee wisdom. It is about walking through seasons where you lost the spark and learning to keep walking anyway. It is about embracing silence and learning to hear whispers. It is about losing comfort and gaining endurance. That is why wisdom is so rare, because it can only be earned by those who refuse to quit when motivation disappears. Graduation into wisdom is not glamorous. It does not come with fireworks or applause. It often comes in tears, in lonely nights, in unanswered questions. Yet those are the places where your roots grow deep. Just as a tree grows most of its roots in the dark soil, unseen, your soul grows most of its wisdom in the unseen seasons. Later, when storms come, you will stand not because you are lucky, but because your roots were made strong in silence. This stage also frees you from shallow living. When you live only on passion, you are tossed around by feelings. One day you are up, the next you are down. But when you live from wisdom, you gain stability. You are no longer a prisoner of your emotions. You can act with love when you don't feel like loving. You can stay committed when you don't feel inspired. You can keep moving when the road is dry. That steadiness becomes a source of strength, not only for you, but for everyone around you. Wisdom is also what allows you to see the bigger picture. Motivation often focuses on the immediate, what feels good now, what excites you today. Wisdom stretches your vision across years, even decades. It reminds you that small steps matter, that delayed gratification pays off, that the seeds you plant in silence can grow into forests long after you are gone. Wisdom is legacy thinking, is living in such a way that your choices echo beyond your lifetime. When God removes motivation, He is inviting you to step into that legacy. He is saying that your life is meant for more than short bursts of passion, is meant for steady light in dark places, is meant for faithfulness over decades, is meant for roots so deep that generations can lean on your strength. That is what wisdom does. It outlives feelings. It outlasts circumstances. It outshines time. The people who reach this stage often look ordinary from the outside. They are not always the loudest, not always the ones on the stage, not always the ones making headlines. But they carry something the world desperately needs. They carry steadiness in chaos, hope in despair, patience in uncertainty. Their wisdom becomes a lighthouse for others, guiding them through storms. That is why your graduation into wisdom matters, not just for you, but for everyone who will one day lean on your strength. So when the fire is gone and silence fills the air, do not despair. You are not being abandoned, you are being graduated. You are being entrusted with something greater than motivation. You are being called into wisdom, the kind of wisdom that cannot be shaken by storms, the kind of wisdom that carries people through, the kind of wisdom that endures when all else fails. This is not the end of your journey, it is the deepening of it. There comes a moment where every listener feels the pull of two worlds, the one that tempts you to stay small, safe, and silent, and the one that dares you to rise, to step into a life so much larger than what you once thought possible. This speech was never about words floating in the air. It was about a fire being lit inside you, a stirring that reminds you that you are more than bones and breath. You are spirit. You are destiny. You are a story still being written. Think about the weight of missed chances, the fear of reaching the end of your days, realizing you lived only half awake. That thought alone should terrify you, but let that fear not paralyze you. It should shake you, break the chains of delay, and make you leap toward the life you know in your soul you were created to live. There is nothing more haunting than wasted potential, and nothing more exhilarating than stepping boldly into your calling. Every pain you've carried, every silent night you've endured, every unanswered question was not meant to crush you, but to carve you. They shaped the wisdom in your voice, the strength in your walk, and the depth in your spirit. People may not always see what you've endured, but life remembers and God sees, and your scars carry a light stronger than any applause could ever give. So the question lingers now. Will you stay the same, or will you let this be the moment you cross the line from hearing to becoming? The world does not need another echo. It needs your sound. It does not need another shadow. It needs your light. It does not need another follower. It needs your leadership, your courage, your presence. There is a dangerous beauty in realizing this truth. You are responsible for what you do with what you've been given. That realization can scare you, but it can also set you free, because once you own it, nothing can stop you. Fear becomes fuel. Doubt becomes discipline. Silence becomes wisdom. And your life becomes a beacon that others follow. So walk out with fire in your veins, but also with roots in your soul. Let excitement guide your first steps. Let wisdom carry your long stride. Let motivation turn into discipline, and let discipline turn into legacy. One day, when people speak your name, let them not just remember what you did, but who you became. Someone who refused to quit, someone who lived awake, someone who graduated into the fullness of their destiny. This is your hour. This is your chapter. This is your chance. Don't let it slip into regret. Step forward now, not tomorrow, not someday, but now, because the world is waiting and your soul already knows the way.